Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Meyer. I'm the Sustainable Food Programs Coordinator here at the University of California, Merced. We have an awesome Ask Me Anything today with Nicoletta, and I'm super excited because I love talking about food systems, food waste, food security, plant-based diets, and all of the like, and I hope we're going to really get into some of that. I've been reading the recent book, The Economics of Sustainable Food, and it's fascinating. So I highly recommend that. The structure of this, we're going to start with her introducing herself briefly, and then she's going to give an awesome presentation. Feel free, and as you're thinking and listening, you can put your questions in the chat and we'll attend to those later. And then at the end of the presentation, we can also just have an open dialogue. You can raise your hand via your video if you want, or your digital hand on Zoom, and we can take questions that way as well. This is really a literal ask me anything. So have your questions ready and we can go ahead and get started. Go for it.
Thank you. So I hope you can all see me. I'm talking to you from Washington, D.C. My name is Nicoletta Batini. I work at the IMF, and currently I'm lead evaluator of the IMF's Independent Evaluation Office, which is the office in charge of assessing the performance of the International Monetary Fund in terms of economic policy advice and lending. And I have just a quick tour d'horizon and how I got to editing and partly writing this book, which is on food systems and economics. I got really interested in this matter because I was working on the fiscal side of things in a number of countries, including the United States of America. And I found that there's a huge, very obvious link between nutrition, climate change, and fiscal accounts of any country. And so I figured out this is really a matter for economists, and food systems are not to be left to, agronomists or clinical scientists of nutrition, but they really pertain to what we do in macroeconomics. And so I just wanted to, so I cobbled a bunch of very prominent scholars in this area and assailed, I should say, the topic from a number of angles, but from an economic standpoint. So I wanted to look at the supply issue, the demand issue, both for advanced and emerging market, low-income countries, and also looking both at terrestrial and marine implications of our current production of food, and looking at what economic policies can be devised to redress food systems in a way that they become healthy for people, economies, and the planet. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I've tried to do with this book, which is co-published by Allen Press, the leading environmental nonprofit publisher in the US, and the IMF. And you can find it on Amazon, including in electronic form. With Erin, we discussed in the few minutes before they started whether I should do a short presentation. Presentations are never short, even if they're paved with the intention to be short. But I'll try to run through it quickly to give you just 360 on why this matters for economics and where we stand. So let me see if I can share my screen. Here. Okay, window, that one. I hope I spell Merced as well. Maybe not.
That's okay. But we can see your screen, so we're all good.
All right. So we got some cherry tomatoes in the background. And here I go. I think it's under everybody's eyes, the phenomenon that led to a profound revolution in the way we produce food. Black and white pictures here on the left show images of 1920s, agricultural habits and how, a typical farm would look like in the United States, and how, fishing went about, catching, and to sort of not too far distant at sea. Sometimes, whaling went far distant at sea, but mostly, kept to coastal areas because fish was abundant. So you didn't need to go and chase it, in the middle of nowhere. But over the years, and usually 100 years gone by, and especially since the 50s, there's been a tremendous change in the way both fishing and agriculture are operated. There's been a profound mechanization and intensification of both agriculture and fishing. And in fact, the agricultural system, the food system, has been transformed into what we called factory farming, because the nature has now been kind of transformed to be more productive through a number of methods, which include not just genetic manipulation, but really the way that the whole process is done almost without labor, through machines and particular methods that enhance productivity, raise profits, and lower costs. And here, so in color, you have some of the pictures of factory farm for pigs. You have the nets, these deep trawlers in the high seas that constantly trawl the ocean bottom, with immense consequences for the bottom, the health of the ecosystem, the marine ecosystem. And then you have precision farming with mechanized tractors and other machinery, often with an internet system that carries out a number of computation that make it such that farming is precise, low cost, and completely automated. So as a result of this revolution, which has been called the Green Revolution, but there's very little green in the revolution itself, today's food systems are the first cause, and this is scientifically proven by hundreds of peer-reviewed papers, is the first cause of climate change, of ozone depletion, which continues despite the treaty that went on to ban CFCs back in the 90s, and nitrogen and phosphorus fluxes, exhaustion of clean soil, clean air, water withdrawal, and loss of biodiversity. And there's often a false dichotomy, and people saying, well, climate change is mostly caused by energy and not food systems, but energy is not really an economic sector, whereas food system and agriculture is. And energy enters everything, from drying your hair to, driving a car to go to a party. And it enters very profoundly in agriculture. So if you divide sectors by their economic meaning, which what we economists do, food systems actually ranks top. And analysis, in science shows that it actually accounts for 34 to 37% of greenhouse gas emissions at the moment, and is expected to hit 50% mark contribution by 2050. I just wanted to, so that's the panel, that's the chart to the left that shows you what I was talking about in terms of contributions to emissions. And the IPCC also puts it, at this range. So these are not like outlier studies. In terms of share of water withdrawal, and something about that in California and with the Colorado River and so forth, you would know that 70% of all fresh water in the world goes to agricultural uses. And we have very little fresh water on the planet, despite 72% of the planet is in liquid form, at least on the surface of it. And of course, a lot of the land which is habitable is used, half of it is used for agriculture. Most of the emissions that I showed in the previous slide from the food system originate in livestock farming and the production of feed for livestock farming. At present, roaming the earth, there's about 75 billion livestock, and about 1 trillion of fish are fished yearly from our oceans. And within this, we count about 1.5 billion cows, and a really huge number of pigs. And these animals are large animals that, of course, are slaughtered every year. And the average age of a cow is like, especially cattle for beef, is a year, less than a year. And they emit considerable amounts of methane, which is the second most potent global warmer greenhouse gas that we know. And of course, pigs, produce, and cows produce manure, and that also emits nitrous oxide, which is extremely potent greenhouse gas, much more than CO2. When you count it all together, we come to the numbers that we were talking about before. In terms of water, just a quick recap of where we stand on planetary availability of water. So our planet, 96% of water is in oceans, which of course contains salt, and so is not fresh. And we have 2.5% of all water is fresh. That's the bar, the three-dimensional bar to the left of these fresh water. 68%, so about 2/3 is in glaciers and ice caps. About 30 is groundwater, and then surface water is about 1.2, which is what we use for drinking and all urban uses and agriculture. And within that, there's some ground ice and permafrost, about 70%, lakes, about 21%. Some is in the atmosphere. And so literally, food system use a massive amount of very little quantity of fresh water we have available, and that they use it in a way that it becomes non-usable in most cases, and that's of course creates a problem of exhaustion of water because it's polluted with hormones and genetically modified organisms, and of course eutrophied, and contains a number of chemicals that make it unusable for human use and for agriculture itself. In terms of biological diversity, we mentioned that it was one of the thing I showed as one of the first causes of this, of course, is agriculture. And we have lost about 96% of biodiversity since the 70s. And these are some of to give you a sense of where we stand now, these are species lost here in the chart, the bar chart to the left. And cumulative 1570 to 1970, that's 400 years. We lost about 800 species. It's here, the very first, very flat bar. And now the estimates is that we lose between, 8,000, that's the middle bar, and 54,000 species every year. So, that's an enormous multiple of the background normal rate of species extinction in the absence, of agriculture. And it'd be like if all these continents got voided and we're left, with Russia and Mongolia in terms of human population. It's a very noticeable phenomenon, and it's been documented in a number of course papers and works across the world by many scholars, but most prominently by the Pulitzer Prize 2014, the sixth extinction, which I recommend you read if you haven't read it yet. In terms of humans, food systems, often we hear the story that there is no alternative. We need to grow food like this. We need to be intensive because we have a lot of people on the planet. But the truth is that the food that is produced is not actually distributed in the way that we need to distribute it. And the world, despite this massive, transformation went through to become more productive, a lot of that doesn't actually arrive on people's tables. So there's a huge phenomenon of malnutrition, both overnutrition and undernutrition across the world. It bears diseases, and it can cause zoonoses. And so here I have a couple of charts. To the right, you see obesity, percent of total population. This is the incidence, and you have the United States, which is winning the Olympics here of obesity at around almost 40%. So, but also a lot of emerging market countries. So obesity is not, a phenomenon of the Western world, the richer world. It's really, it's a very common phenomenon even in countries that have lower income standards. And it's a wrong diets is a main cause of non-communicable diseases beyond obesity, which of course is related to cardiovascular issues, diabetes, and so forth. There are, we know from the WHO studies and many other analyses that having the wrong diet is the main risk factor for the most common cause of death globally. And here to the left, we have a bar chart showing, how much the first bar to the left showing global population. I have to update this. These slides are 2 or 3 years old. But basically, of the total population, a huge amount is, of course, either overweight, underweight, or deficient in key minerals, obese, stunted, and wasted. So this shows that the food system doesn't really work for half the global population. And in fact, one of the reasons why it doesn't work is also that we overproduce, and a lot of the food that we overproduce and we trash the earth for is lost or wasted. So they say that if lost or wasted was a country, it'd be the third largest global polluter in the world and emitter of GHGES. The way we raise animals, which cause all these emissions and deterioration of ecosystems, is also very dangerous for the advancement of antimicrobial resistance, because animals are fed subtherapeutic doses of antibiotics to promote growth and to make them sort of resilient, very intensive factory farming environment. And that subtherapeutic doses creates resistance to antibiotics, and resistance is now prevalent in a number of countries. And in the US, it's killing more people than AIDS already, and it's a big headache for health and for what is in store for us in terms of therapies that we might have access to address diseases in the future. Zoonoses have become more emergent in the past. There's been an acceleration of diseases. I must say that after what came out of a number of researchers and published paper on the synthetic origins of SARS-CoV, maybe I should revise this slide. I don't think now that I attribute the origin of SARS-CoV to zoonoses. I think it's, I actually been sold on the lab theory, but clearly, the encroachment of ecosystems and especially factory farming. Here we have swine flu and avian flu. And the way we grow animals in a very constrained environments is conducive to an escalation of some types of contagion, not necessarily to new viruses, but existing viruses that get more in contact with human population. So why are food systems macro relevant? Why do they matter for macroeconomies? Well, because, we talk a lot about energy, but food is human energy. We need it to live. And so eating well or bad affects economic growth, affects jobs, because if we do it intensely in a mechanized fashion, we basically cut down jobs. It affects productivity because people are sick or retire early, they're less productive. It affects, as we discussed at the very beginning, public finance, because if people are sick, it's a burden, I should say, on fiscal accounts. In the US, 75% of all private debt is for medical bills. So I think that tells a story there. It affects asset prices because it affects farmland and the price of food, which enters inflation. And of course, health and diet equality is income and wealth equality, and so it also hits in terms of social cohesion and what have you, in terms of an equal distribution of income. Just to give you a flavor of this chart shows the evolution of agricultural labor by world region, dividing the little dots are developing countries, the thick line is the world, and then you have industrialized countries in a line dash 2 dots, and then the dashed is transition countries. And you can see how industrialized countries, for example, the dash 2 dots has seen a dramatic decline in employment of both. These are male and female, 15 plus years and up, persons active. And we now, it's the right-hand scale here. So we've gone from around 50 to about 10 millions of persons active. And that is, it's a shrinkage that is enormous because now farming is completely mechanized, and so is fishing. I just wanted to show, so that's the job impact, for example, food systems transformation. Here's, for example, the impact of being overweight on GDP, and it's an estimate by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development called the heavy burden of obesity. And it shows, they actually quantified the percentage difference in GDP due to the percentage of overweight people in the population. And these numbers, you read them on the left-hand side axis, on the y-axis, they're pretty irrelevant. We're talking about 3 percentage points of GDP. In terms of public finance, there are enormous externalities of food systems through globesity, the non-communicable disease pandemic. So the pandemic of cancers, cardiovascular diseases that we have, the antimicrobial resistance, which has been estimated will cost humanity between $100 to $200 trillion by 2050. And pollution of all the things that make planet Earth a living planet. So the book basically lists all the policies we can use, makes country examples, who has done what successfully, and it basically calls for a redressing of food systems to reduce livestock for meat and dairy, and in a correlative fashion, reduce consumption of these products, not just the supply, and then in parallel increase the organic production or agro-regenerative, agroecological production of alternative plant-based foods that would meet the protein and caloric shortfall of a reduction in livestock, and an increase in areas under conservation. This has been called by the Convention on Biological Diversity in Canada recently. And then this requires a third lever, which is to nudge demand into dietary shift towards less meat and dairy, more plant-based food, and to validate the equilibrium. And so how do we do this? Well, as I said, there's a bunch of economic policy that can be utilized. They would differ. They're country specific, but they do. It's a task for macro policies because it involves price reallocations and shifts in consumption, and a number of structural reforms that can reinforce these macro policies. Some examples: phasing out production subsidies for meat and dairy. A lot of meat producers receive federal subsidies here in the United States, but in Europe and other countries, China, etc. Introduce subsidies for plant-based foods, and invest in the transition through, land change, research and development, vocational training, and so forth, for organic agriculture, providing tax credits to cushion these potential taxes on demand of meat and dairy, and then education, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a bunch of tax policies that have been advocated, and we talk about in the book, and they include things like taxes on foods and production that elicits this pollution and this GHGES and ecosystem destruction. And this is quite technical, but they have to do with VAT and other types of demand policies through taxes. In terms of structural policies, we envisage a bunch of partnerships between public sectors and private sector to support research on nutrition, which of course is not, it's not very favored by those, big food or even big pharma that leaves off, unfortunately, a lot of these diseases that are now chronic. But also a healthcare system reform that would bring more of knowledge about nutrition scores and electronic records, and really, hours to be taught to medical students in medical school on nutrition, and instead of moving healthcare from being defensive, surgery and drugs, to being preventive through proper abatement of nutritional risk factors. Limits on additives that are now everywhere, and especially children's food, and regulation on retailing and marketing. On waste and loss, again, public-private investment in storage and processing, post-harvest. A lot of regulations, I won't go through them here, but can be applied and being applied successfully in a number of countries, including donation e-platforms and so forth, so that food doesn't immediately reaches the unattended demand. And then in terms of conservation, 4 chapters in the book about conservation policies, economic policies for conservation. We still need to do work on mapping of the Earth's natural capital accounting, which is separate from mapping, but of course related. Land reforms, so empower indigenous people, because they're the best stewards, historically, of lands that need preservation or rewilding. And conventions to ban the demand of products from deforestation, and then a bunch of international funding schemes. I think I will conclude here. I'm sorry it took a lot of time because this is, because the books, there's a lot of stuff in it, but I want to give you an overview. Food systems are key to fix the climate and biodiversity crisis that we're facing, as well as the health crisis that we're facing. Remember that the people that died of COVID are people that had the diseases that are primarily caused by wrong diet. And also the economic crisis that we're facing, which is now upon us in a number of ways, and also will help us achieve a lot of the sustainable development goals to rebalance, the global economy. And to do that, we need to transform food systems. And we've been calling in the book, I've been calling personally for less livestock. Not just on humane reasons, but also for all the other reasons. Less pesticides and fertilizers, and much more organic farming, and less land change, less movement of the earth crust, but rather conservation. And we know that policies exist. We give examples. These are promising. And here's some references. And that's the end of my presentation. So let me just come back to the screen and stop sharing. And if you have questions, either vocally or in the chat, I'd be welcome to take them.
I love that final photo. It's so cute. We also had some questions that came in via the registration link. So maybe if we want to start there while folks are kind of thinking of their other ones. So one question that someone asked was, so food packaging in Italy and Euro nations, do they allow retail foods like snack chips to be sold in non-recyclable plastic? And that is from Mark. I will also put that in the chat momentarily because I'm a visual person, so I like to read things, including your book, by the way. So that is the question. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, so I think globally, the packaging is a problem. Plastics, we deal with plastics in one chapter in particular that I wrote with a National Geographic resident on oceans, because plastic eventually end up in the oceans, and that's how they contaminate back ecosystems, including our own bodies. And regulations that we talk about in the book on packaging relate more to nutritional information, because providing nutritional information on packaging has been found to be very helpful in reducing obesity and other things. But we don't actually address in the book the issue of packaging of food through plastic, because plastic is, of course, one of the planetary boundaries that we have passed a long time ago, but it's not in scope of this book. So I guess going out of scope, I could possibly argue that when you regulate the packaging to have a nutritional score, you can also introduce other regulations to control the use of plastic in food packaging. By the way, plastic in food packaging is not the main source of plastic production or usage globally. Half of it is on commercial fishing. Half of all war plastics come from commercial fishing and abandoned nets, and then, so that would be something which is in scope, but we don't have policies for plastic reduction in the book. focus on that. It's a big problem. So.
Awesome. All right. The next question was, what macroeconomic policy would have to be implemented to achieve these goals, and what impacts would it have on the public? So that's from Casey.
Right. So, as I said, the book has a portfolio of policies, and they would depend on a number of things. So what's the initial condition of that country, and what's the, a lot of economic policies are palatable because they can be effective because the preferences of the public are such that they're acceptable, or they can be pushed through. Just to make you an example, one of the chapters of the book deals with insects, because insects are very important for conservation. And protecting insects is a key to making sure that the planet doesn't implode from a biosphere point of view. So we have actually a chapter which is in the conservation part, and that calls for conservation efforts on insects. But some countries eat insects, and they've done that and culturally acceptable. But just to make an example, Europe has now passed legislation that insects flour can be included in the ingredients of flours and other products that are for commercial retail use and sale in supermarkets, and without, I think, specifying that this has to be on the label. And that's something, for example, in Italy that has been heavily rejected by the population. And, so you can really cross the line, and then it can actually backfire. And same with taxes on meat and dairy. There have been some, positive success stories, but also some negative stories. And it all depends on how, these policies are designed, how they're implemented, and what's the ability and the art in making sure that, if they're losers, they're rewarded or compensated for, and that, there's a dialectic and a democratic process to bring about the transformation of food systems. Food is at the heart of who we are. We do it, we eat 3 times a day, and it's not something that you just at a pen stroke change and impose from above. So I think it's very important to conduct change through policy, but in a very democratic way. The issues. So there's a question, but shall I read it myself? And here.
Sure.
People think. So Cinnamon Danube, the issues we have with our food system is so big, and many of the recommended changes run counter to the way people think about what and how they eat. We just say we can each do in our day-to-day lives to address these issues, as many of the recommendations here are at the policy level. I really struggle to stay positive when the problem is so big. And recommendations, yeah. There is a very simple recommendation that I like to follow myself, and it's so what some people try to do is to convince that we should all abandon meat or dairy, or and that's of course not gonna fly, because a lot of people are feel that that's not a sacrifice they want to make. And also I think there aren't sufficient alternatives in terms of fresh offer of plant-based food, not synthetic food, but plant-based, not technical food, like sometimes you have a plant-based burger that is made in a strange way, extracting pea proteins from. I'm just saying, like sufficient offer of a variety of fresh foods that people can access at the right price as well, because the system is so skewed and so wrongly subsidized. So one thing that I think makes sense to do is to try to reduce the amount of meat and dairy in our diets. That's good for our health, it's good for the planet. And to give a metric of what would really make a difference is if we all forwent, if we all forego meat and dairy, or animal products before dinner. So if out of 3 meals, 2 you go vegan, let's put it that way, you really make an enormous change. It's much more than you would ever possibly be able to do, even by cutting to zero your air travel, your road travel, or go for other types of efficientization of your life in terms of energy and ecosystem encroachment. So no animal food before dinner. So I think that is not a big sacrifice, and it's easy to remember, and we can work it out with kids. And I'm Italian, and I can have a cereal with some non-dairy milk and in the morning, and the fruit, and then have some pasta with sauce at lunch. That's actually what we do anyway. And then if you want, you can have fish or meat or eggs or cheese in the evening, which is usually dinner, at least for us, is a cultural event. When we sit at the table together, that's the moment we as a family reunite. So I hope that lifts your spirits, and it's achievable. Maybe you can tell your friends as well.
I'm glad you asked that, because I was going to ask the same thing. As I have been reading this book, parts of me, like, I'm really optimistic about the food system, but also I'm very concerned. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I also don't really have a big role in like the lobbying and everything. Like, need to work more on the advocacy piece of my food system work. So I like that you're providing individual recommendations. That's really helpful. Any other questions from the audience before I move on to another from the registration? Feel free and unmute if you would like. Awesome. So a question from the registration. This is from Alaya. How did you start your company, and what resources did you use that were helpful? I don't know if that's pertinent, but she did mention wanting to get or wanting to become an entrepreneur. So maybe if you have any resources or ideas on that note.
Right. So I didn't start my company because I don't have a company, but I think if you're interested in learning about this kind of agriculture that we talked about today, there's a number of movement. I mean, there's a movement that, of course, has philosophized and written and implemented a lot of the prescriptions that are in the book. And in fact, the book has fed off a lot of this movement ideas. And you will have seen that I've included in the book people like John Eckert, who is, a professor in Minnesota, and he's a theoretician of polyculture. So going back to farms that have both crops and animals, as in an ecosystem, as it used to be in those black and white pictures I showed. And I've invited people like Brent Smith, who is a pioneer of ocean regenerative farming. He's patented these very simple kind of ocean farms made by ropes and buoys, where basically he grows seaweed, kelp, or other types of weeds, and then oysters and clams and so forth. And this is really oxygenates the seas and creates a lot of jobs, because there's a study by the World Bank that shows that tens of millions of jobs can be created very easily through these farms, even in advanced economies. You recreate the kind of reefs that originally occurred in a lot of our coast, for example, around in New York City, so this movement has of course a number of entrepreneurs, going to your question. And I just visited for my birthday, that was April 15th, Polyface Farm by Joel Salatin. He's one of the people of the movement. He's very well known in the United States. Of course, there are lots of other people around the world that I work with and know. And they have a model of how to become extremely profitable by working the land in a way that is, respectful of the land and the planet, and that works with nature and not against nature. So if you want to check it out, you can find, go down the rabbit hole, go on Polyface Farm, Polyface, which means the farm of many faces from the Greek. You'll find, books and other material, and you can, find many more connections. And there are examples, for example, in the documentary Sustainable, which I watched years ago, that shows, how people go back to growing ancient grains and, having bakeries that only utilize a certain method and certain harvests, which are totally organic. And so you can get ideas. I mean, I won't, I think I cannot give you so many more examples, but we also talk about vertical farming, and there's a whole, dimension there of how to do urban farming in a green way. And that's another avenue of entrepreneurship. So you can get ideas from the book, but you can also find through documentaries, actors that have made, have success stories in this area. I encourage you to look at them. They're very beautiful documentaries and interviews of real people.
Awesome, thank you. Since I work for a university, I would be remiss to not ask what universities can do. In your book, you do mention kind of a lack of research regarding like organic agriculture and so on. But are there other advocacy efforts and or sustainable policies that we can take to address some of the issues outlined in your book, or just in the food system in general?
I think there are many things that universities can do. One point to start is to start operating in a sort of multidisciplinary fashion through life sciences. So a lot of universities have, a separation between medical school and, biology, including conservation biology, and then agricultural, sciences, and then, climate sciences and economics. And I think the time has come to, unite forces. And that's what we do in this book. Financiers and finance very much at the heart of the transformation of food systems. So that's, creating departments that are more multidisciplinary. It's kind of like a meta approach and an idea, I think, that would pay fruit and bring success, because there'll be many more interactions among minds that need to talk to each other. And then, of course, there's university tends to go with grant money and often influenced, by big corporations. I would suggest that, if one wants to make a difference, you have to take a different path, and you have to find ways to mobilize financing for research that often, it's orthogonal to where big food, big chemical, big oil are going. And some universities have become, dependent on grants that, however, come with very strong ties and demands on the content and output of research. I think we need to sever these ties, and we need to go the way that real, honest intellectual research demands. And with this book, I leave that myself on my shoulders. It wasn't a topic that the IMF wanted to talk about a few years ago when I proposed the book. It did not accept the book for publication. And I went outside, I found a publisher, and then the IMF read it and said, oh, we want to publish it too. And so sometimes you have to take some risks, and we need to take more risks personally, including at the personal level. And that's how universities can can make a big difference.
That's a fantastic answer. I could probably use more risk taking in my life as well. So I do a lot of work around the food system and previously have engaged with farmers, and I have two conflicting ideas here. So some of the farmers that I've worked with are not very receptive to change. They're very much, like, why change? We've been doing it for this long. What's the point? But then other farmers I've heard, because I'm vegan, so I've heard from like various movements that some farmers really do want to change and go towards more like plant-based options as opposed to livestock and dairy farming and so on. However, they are challenged and feel like they cannot switch because they've invested so much like monetary funds, like equipment and so on into their current operations, and or they have these relationships with these big ag companies that are hard to break. So there's a fantastic movement called transformation. I believe that's with the I think it's Mercy for Animals in collaboration with a plant-based creamery called Miyoko's. I think they're doing some work to encourage farmers to transform their farms from dairy into like plant-based options. So I guess my thought and question here is like, how can we better also engage farmers to change towards more plant-based options?
That's a good question. I mean, that's the $1 million question. I think so. There, the whole farm operation direction is heavily influenced by in the United States by federal policies. The same in the EU is going to be the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy. These policies have been stacked to favor and to produce an agricultural system which is basically organized along large farms, enormous farms sometimes, that are heavily mechanized, monoculture, monocrop, and very heavy in usage of petrochemical products. So farmers, of course, they don't have the money. Often the energy, the age of farmers is quite elevated, for example, in the United States. They don't have, often the access to credit to transform. And so I see, and the book will make very clear, a role for public policy there. Public policy, can really help, at least in the initial phases of a transformation, to move a farm from being, conventional to being organic or more niche, more profitable. But the returns are enormous, both for the farmer and for the community. So, I don't know, you surely have seen the movie, The Biggest Little Farm, and that's an example of how, how much energy and design is required and years of work, and including years of risk-taking at the business level, are necessary to shift a farm or make a farm, fully organic and fully ecosystem compliant. So I think, but there's also a role for private finance. I'm part of a group that is called the Good Food Finance Initiative, which is now, a global initiative. And, we're thinking actively how to mobilize the demand for investment in green food to farmers. That's not easy because farmers are, now farms are so large, and you want to split them up, and you want more, people of different minorities and younger ages entering the production of food, because often they're, more sensitive and more ready to take risks and more energetic. And the others accompany them by the hand through training, access to credit, and insurance. Crop insurance favors monoculture in the US. So you need to, rescale the approach, the policy approach in in the Farm Bill to make it compatible with the equilibrium that we envisage. If that's not done, it's going to be, swimming against the tide. And it's going to be very complicated. If it's profitable and doable, there's a big push from government, it's going to happen. So, we need to work on public policy, but we also need to work on successful examples on how to clone those and farm them out, and bring more education and voices around, on how to do these things. And so the initiatives you're mentioning, including, their renature. There's a bunch of, now small startups or entrepreneurs that actually train farmers to become, planet compliant and people compliant. The returns are very large, but we need more critical mass in government. I don't see that happening much. I've worked on the US, I've worked in Europe. It's a slow process. Often it's done by force in some parts of Europe. So we need to learn a way to work together with farmers to ensure that, they're, own the transformation, they want the transformation, and there's something in it for them. We can't work one against the other. But that requires political will, and that will is unfortunately not there yet. The politics is very captive of big industries and corporations. So we need to work on that. It's uphill, but we can make it, both as consumers and intellectuals.
Great answer. And then my final question, which I like to ask everyone, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the food system, what would you do and why?
I would remove all subsidies to intensive animal agriculture. I think that's the biggest bang for the buck. This, that would level the playing field with a lot of other things. It would relinquish enormous amounts of land back for conservation purposes or growing plants that we can eat, and that is really what we need to do, is to remove the subsidies to intensive animal agriculture producers and farmers. It's a win-win for planet and people. So I thought about it carefully. This is a question that comes off, around a lot to me, and there are a bunch of other things you can do, but I think this will really, break the camel's back, and that's what we need to do. But there's tremendous resistance for that, and but as I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I hear a lot. Oops, sorry, I'm echoing a little bit. I get the same resistance when I encourage folks just regarding plant-based and so on. But I think that increasingly we are going that direction. And I think that increasingly people are going to see some of the negative impacts of animal ag and just unsustainable agriculture in general. Also, just a quick aside, I don't know if these were intentional, but I loved the food puns within the book. There were some nice ones around like a key ingredient to changing the food system. And then there was one about eating up something, and they just make me laugh. I love puns. So thank you for that, including a little bit of maybe unintentional or intentional humor into a book that's imperative to our food system. So thank you for joining us. I could talk about this for days. We didn't even talk about the fact that 33% of food is lost or wasted, and that's a huge lever on addressing food system transformation. So maybe we'll have to do a second talk about that or something. But thank you all for attending, and have a fantastic rest of the day. This will be up on YouTube shortly, so you can listen to it at your leisure. And thank you, Nicoletta, for joining us. This was fantastic. And everyone, have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.